The last Route 22 bus rolled quietly through downtown Cleveland before sunrise, carrying only a handful of passengers. Near the back sat a confident woman in a navy coat, holding a small wooden box against her chest, as if it contained something priceless. Inside was a faded bus ticket stamped with two simple words, "Keep moving." When the gray-haired driver glanced at her in the mirror, he smiled politely, never realizing she had spent 7 years searching for this exact moment. By the time the bus reached its final stop, tears were already running down her face. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. We'd love to see how far this story travels. And if heartfelt stories about kindness, second chances, and ordinary heroes speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey. 7 years earlier, Brittany Butler believed that the safest place in the world was the small kitchen of apartment 3B on East 79th Street in Cleveland. Every evening after finishing her bookkeeping shift at a neighborhood plumbing company, she tied on the same faded yellow apron with tiny embroidered daisies and baked until nearly midnight. The apartment smelled of cinnamon vanilla and butter far more often than it smelled of dinner. While most people watched television after work, Brittany measured flour with the precision of someone balancing hope itself. Her daughter Lily, only 8 years old, would sit at the tiny kitchen table coloring pictures while waiting for another tray of cookies to come out of the oven. "Mom," Lily asked one Thursday evening, "when we have our own bakery, can I put my drawings on the wall?" Brittany smiled, without looking up from the mixing bowl. "Only if you're willing to let customers tell you how beautiful they are every single day." Lily grinned. "Deal." The dream wasn't enormous. It wasn't about becoming famous. It wasn't about opening 10 locations. Brittany wanted one warm bakery where neighbors knew each other's names, children could buy cookies after school, and lonely people could sit by the window with fresh coffee without feeling rushed. That dream had taken 12 years to build, not in bricks, in sacrifices. She skipped vacations. She drove the same 15-year-old Honda Civic even after the air conditioner stopped working. She packed leftovers instead of buying lunch. Every birthday gift she received went into savings instead of shopping bags. Whenever friends invited her to expensive restaurants, she politely declined. "Saving for something special?" they often asked. She always answered the same way. "I'm baking my future $1 at a time." Inside a blue metal cash box hidden beneath winter blankets in the bedroom closet were dozens of deposit slips from the credit union. Every month, she added a little more. Sometimes only $100, sometimes $400. Occasionally nothing at all, but she never withdrew a cent. By the spring she turned 36, the balance had reached $42,680. Enough for a modest storefront. Enough to buy used commercial ovens. Enough to finally stop dreaming and begin living. At least that was what she believed. Her husband, Ethan Butler, had always supported the dream with convincing words. "We're almost there," he would say while kissing her forehead. "Just a little longer." Brittany never questioned him. She trusted him with passwords. She trusted him with paperwork. She trusted him with the future. Trust, after all, wasn't something she counted. It wasn't written on bank statements. It simply existed, or so she thought. Over the previous 6 months, however, tiny changes had quietly entered their home. Ethan stayed out later than usual. He carried 2 phones. Sometimes he stared at financial websites until well after midnight before quickly closing the screen whenever Brittany walked into the room. She noticed, but she chose love over suspicion. Everyone has stressful seasons, she reminded herself. One Friday evening, Ethan came home unusually cheerful. He ordered pizza. He laughed louder than he had in months. He hugged Lily longer than usual before putting her to bed. After midnight, he wrapped an arm around Brittany. "You know," he whispered, "next year we'll probably be painting our own bakery." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I've waited 12 years. One more won't hurt." She fell asleep smiling. It would be the last peaceful night she would have for a very long time. At exactly 6:12 the following morning, Brittany woke to silence. No shower running, no coffee brewing, no footsteps. She stretched lazily before noticing Ethan's side of the bed was cold. Very cold. She assumed he had gone out for breakfast. Then she noticed the closet door hanging open. Half of his clothes were gone. His suitcase had disappeared. Her stomach tightened. She reached for her phone. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemail notifications. 5 emails from the credit union. Her heartbeat accelerated. Hands trembling, she opened the banking app. Loading. Loading. Then the screen refreshed. Checking account balance, $184.27. Savings account balance, $0. She blinked, closed the app, opened it again. 0. She checked once more. Still 0. Every deposit, every overtime shift, every skipped holiday, every birthday, every Christmas bonus. Gone. She dialed Ethan immediately, straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail, again. His phone had already been disconnected. No. The word escaped as little more than air. She rushed to the bedroom closet. The blue metal cash box lay open. Empty. Not a single deposit receipt remained. On the dresser sat a plain, white envelope. Inside was 1 sheet of notebook paper. Don't look for me. I had debts you never knew about. I couldn't fix them. I'm sorry. Ethan? No explanation. No address. No promise. Nothing. Brittany stood frozen. Then another knock came at the apartment door. A man in a dark suit introduced himself politely. Mrs. Butler. Yes. I'm here regarding the outstanding personal loan guaranteed under your joint financial agreement. She stared blankly. What loan? His expression softened. I'm afraid your husband borrowed substantially against your shared assets. Her knees nearly gave way. The stranger handed her a packet nearly an inch thick. Collection notices, legal documents, past due statements. More debt than she had ever imagined. The door closed. The apartment became impossibly quiet. From the hallway came tiny footsteps. Lily stood rubbing her sleepy eyes while hugging her stuffed rabbit. Mom. Brittany hurriedly wiped away tears. Yeah, sweetheart. Where's Daddy? For several long seconds, Brittany couldn't answer. How do you explain betrayal to an 8-year-old? How do you explain that the person who promised forever had disappeared before breakfast? She knelt until their eyes met. Daddy, had to leave. For work, Brittany forced herself to nod. For now. Lily accepted the answer because children still believe adults know what tomorrow looks like. Brittany wished she still did. She prepared pancakes that morning, even though she couldn't swallow a bite herself. She braided Lily's hair with steady hands, despite feeling as though the floor beneath her had vanished. She smiled while packing a school lunch made mostly from whatever remained in the refrigerator. Only after the apartment door closed behind Lily did Brittany allow herself to collapse onto the kitchen floor. Around her sat measuring cups, mixing bowls, vanilla extract. The handwritten notebook containing every bakery recipe she had perfected over 12 years. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon, but for the first time, it no longer smelled like hope. It smelled like something left unfinished. Outside her window, a city bus rolled slowly past the apartment building, disappearing around the corner before she even noticed it. Within days, that ordinary bus would become the only bridge between the life Brittany had lost and the life she had not yet imagined. Monday mornings used to begin with the sound of Brittany Butler's old Honda Civic struggling to start. Now they began at a bus stop. 5 days after Ethan disappeared, the Honda was gone. Selling it had been the quickest way to satisfy one collection agency before they placed a lien on everything else she owned. Watching the tow truck pull away had felt strangely similar to watching her marriage disappear. Both had carried pieces of the future she once believed was certain. At 6:18 every morning, Brittany and Lily stood beneath a weathered bus shelter on Euclid Avenue. The shelter offered little protection from Cleveland's unpredictable spring weather. Wind slipped through the cracked glass panels, carrying the smell of wet pavement and fresh coffee from a diner across the street. Brittany always arrived 10 minutes early, not because she liked waiting, because missing one bus could mean arriving late for work, and arriving late 3 times could mean losing the only steady paycheck she had left. She carried the same brown canvas tote every day. Inside were neatly organized folders, a small lunch packed in reusable containers. Lily's extra sweater, a worn recipe notebook, and a blue envelope holding every legal notice she still hadn't found the courage to open. She had started measuring her life differently, not by years, by bus schedules. At precisely 6:27, the familiar white and blue city bus rounded the corner, Route 22. The doors folded open with a familiar hiss. The driver greeted every passenger the same way. "Morning." Nothing more, nothing less. Thomas Walker had been driving buses in Cleveland for 35 years. He knew regular passengers without knowing their names. The college student with oversized headphones, the retired mechanic who always carried crossword puzzles, the nurse who worked overnight shifts and fought sleep every morning, the construction workers with mud still clinging to their boots. He noticed people because that was part of surviving the job. You learned to recognize tired eyes, angry voices, loneliness, joy, sometimes danger. Most passengers believed drivers only watched traffic. Thomas watched people. When Brittany first boarded the bus, she immediately caught his attention, not because she looked desperate, but because she was trying so hard not to. She smiled politely, held Lily's hand, waited patiently behind every passenger. She counted exact change twice before placing it into the fare box. Not once did she ask for sympathy. Not once did she sigh dramatically. She simply paid, sat near the middle, looked out the window. The first week passed without a single conversation between them. Thomas merely noticed patterns. She always wore the same navy cardigan. Her shoes had recently been repaired by hand. Every lunch container was carefully labeled. Every dollar was stretched with astonishing discipline. On Friday morning, rain fell harder than usual. Brittany and Lily reached the shelter already soaked from the short walk. Lily's backpack looked heavier than she did. "You okay?" Brittany asked softly. "My math test," Lily admitted. "I'm scared." Brittany crouched beside her. "You know what Grandma used to tell me?" Lily shook her head. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway." Lily smiled faintly. "I can do that." The bus arrived. Passengers hurried aboard to escape the rain. Brittany reached into her coat pocket, then another pocket, then her purse. Her expression changed. She searched again. Coins clinked nervously in her palm. She counted once, then twice, then a third time. $1, 1 quarter, 2 dimes, 1 nickel. She froze. The fare had increased that Monday. She was 30 cents short. Her face turned pale. Behind her, passengers shifted impatiently. Someone glanced at a watch. Another sighed loudly. "It's only 30 cents, one man muttered. Another woman rolled her eyes. "Hurry up!" Brittany swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." She stepped backward. "Lily, we'll wait for the next bus." The little girl looked confused. "But Mom, you'll be late." "It's okay." "No," Lily whispered. "It isn't." Thomas watched everything through the large windshield. He had seen embarrassment before, many times. Some people became angry. Some argued. Some begged. This woman didn't either. She simply accepted disappointment, as though life had already trained her to expect it. Thomas reached toward the fare console, tapped 2 buttons. The machine emitted a short electronic beep. He frowned theatrically. Huh. He tapped it again, then looked toward Brittany. Looks like the fare reader's acting up again. Several passengers groaned. Thomas shrugged. It'll sort itself out. He reached beneath the dashboard, pulled out 2 paper transfer tickets, stamped them one at a time using a small handheld stamp he always carried. Thunk, thunk. He handed one to Brittany, one to Lily. There you go. Brittany looked confused. I haven't paid. Thomas smiled politely. Machine accepted it. She stared at the ticket, then at him. But it happens. She hesitated. Every instinct told her the machine hadn't accepted anything. Yet Thomas never looked at her with pity, never lowered his voice, never announced to the bus that he was helping someone. He simply spoke as though nothing unusual had happened, as though her dignity mattered more than 30 cents. Slowly, Brittany accepted the tickets. Thank you. Have a good morning. She and Lily sat down. Only after the bus pulled away did Brittany notice something different. Near the bottom corner of both paper tickets was a blue ink stamp. Keep moving. Simple block letters. Nothing decorative. No company logo. Just 2 words. Lily leaned closer. Mom. What? I like that. So do I. She folded the ticket carefully instead of throwing it away. When they reached Lily's school, Brittany kissed her forehead. Good luck. You too. Lily tucked her own ticket into the front pocket of her backpack. I think I'll keep mine. Brittany smiled. Me too. Neither of them knew that Thomas stamped those words on only a handful of tickets every year. The stamp had belonged to Grace, his late wife. Years before cancer stole her from him, she had been an elementary school teacher. Whenever one of her students struggled, she stamped those exact words across the top of difficult homework assignments. Keep moving. She believed encouragement should be brief enough to remember forever. After she died, Thomas found the stamp inside her classroom supplies. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Instead, he carried it in his bus bag. Sometimes months passed without using it. He waited for moments that felt important. Moments when someone didn't need money nearly as much as they needed permission to believe tomorrow still existed. As Brittany rode toward downtown that rainy morning, she traced the blue letters with her thumb over and over. Keep moving. She had no idea who had written them. She certainly didn't know the history behind them. But for reasons she couldn't explain, she slipped the ticket into the clear pocket of her worn leather wallet instead of dropping it into the trash. It would become the only thing she carried every single day for the next 7 years. Within 3 weeks, Brittany Butler's world had settled into a rhythm she had never imagined she could survive. Every weekday began at 4:45 a.m. Her alarm rarely had the chance to ring twice. She slipped quietly from the pull-out couch where she now slept so Lily could have the bedroom to herself. The apartment felt emptier without Ethan, but not quieter. Bills made their own kind of noise. Collection notices arrived almost daily, each envelope carrying another reminder that yesterday's mistakes could still knock on today's door. She brewed inexpensive coffee, packed 2 lunches, and ironed Lily's school uniform while oatmeal simmered on the stove. At exactly 5:55, she woke her daughter with the same gentle words every morning. Sunshine, it's time. Lily never complained. Children sometimes become older overnight when life demands it. By 6:18, they stood once again beneath the Route 22 shelter. Thomas Walker saw them before they stepped aboard. He noticed another small change. Brittany's navy cardigan had a tiny patch sewn neatly over one elbow. It matched almost perfectly, but someone looking carefully could tell it had been repaired instead of replaced. She had done it herself. She always repaired before replacing. That told him more about her than any conversation could have. "Morning," Thomas greeted. "Good morning," Brittany answered with the same polite smile. Lily waved enthusiastically. "Hi, Mr. Bus Driver." Thomas chuckled. "Morning there." He never corrected her by saying his name. Being Mr. Bus Driver seemed perfectly honorable. As the bus rolled through downtown Cleveland, Brittany mentally organized the next 16 hours. Her bookkeeping shift ended at 2:30. From 3 until 6, she cleaned offices in a medical building. After that, she crossed 2 blocks to Romano's Family Grill, where she washed dishes until nearly 10. By the time she and Lily returned home, it was often after 11. Sleep had become something borrowed instead of owned. One Tuesday afternoon, while emptying trash bins on the 12th floor of the office building, Brittany found herself staring through enormous windows overlooking Lake Erie. The sunset painted the water gold. For a brief second, she remembered standing on that same shoreline years earlier with Ethan. Back then, they had talked about bakery names. She had wanted Butter and Hope. He preferred Sweet Butler. Now, neither name belonged anywhere. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You missed a spot." The building supervisor pointed toward fingerprints on a conference room window. "I'm sorry." She cleaned it again. He nodded curtly before walking away. "Not cruel, not kind. Simply another reminder that mistakes had become expensive." That evening, rain flooded several intersections across the city. Traffic crawled. Brittany finished washing dishes 10 minutes later than usual. She looked at the clock. 10:07. The last Route 22 connection left at 10:15. She grabbed her coat and ran. Cold air burned her lungs. Her shoes splashed through puddles. The heavy canvas bag slapped against her shoulder with every step. Halfway down the block, she saw the bus. Its doors had already closed. Headlights brightened. The engine growled. "No." She ran harder. "Please." From inside the driver's seat, Thomas glanced into the large side mirror. There she was, the same woman who never asked for favors. Running through rain with one hand holding her bag and the other shielding papers beneath her coat. He looked ahead. No traffic behind him, no safety risk. He waited. 7 seconds. 8, 9. Brittany reached the front door completely out of breath. "I'm sorry." Thomas opened the doors. "No problem." She climbed aboard, bending over with her hands on her knees, trying desperately to catch her breath. "I thought I'd missed it." Thomas shrugged casually. "Light was still red." It wasn't. The light had already turned green. He simply didn't see any reason to mention that. Passengers hardly noticed. To them, it was a delay of less than 10 seconds. To Brittany, it meant getting home before midnight instead of walking nearly 3 miles through unfamiliar streets. She scanned her pass and quietly found her usual seat. Again, Thomas had helped her without making her feel like someone in need of rescuing. That difference mattered, more than he realized. A few mornings later, another small incident unfolded. Lily accidentally dropped her lunch container while stepping onto the bus. The lid burst open. Apple slices rolled beneath several seats. Crackers scattered across the floor. Peanut butter splattered across the rubber aisle. "Oh no," Lily froze. "I'm sorry." Several passengers instinctively lifted their feet. Brittany immediately knelt. "I've got it." She gathered crackers one by one with shaking hands. Embarrassment colored her face. She had packed those apple slices before dawn. They represented money she couldn't waste. Thomas set the parking brake. Without saying a word, he reached into a cabinet behind his seat and handed Brittany a small roll of paper towels. "No rush." His voice remained calm. "We've got time." Nobody complained. An elderly passenger quietly helped collect the apples. A college student picked up the lunchbox lid. Within a minute, everything had been cleaned. Lily whispered, "Thank you." Thomas simply nodded. Looks good as new. As Brittany returned the paper towels, she noticed another familiar blue stamp on that day's transfer ticket. Keep moving. The words somehow looked different each time she saw them. Not because the ink changed, because she did. That evening, after Lily fell asleep, Brittany opened her wallet. Inside were now 4 bus tickets. Each carried the same blue stamp. She smoothed them carefully across the kitchen table. Beside them lay unpaid utility bills, a final notice from the electric company, an overdue rent reminder, medical insurance paperwork. One stack represented everything she was losing. The other represented something she couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps. Or evidence that strangers could still be gentle. She returned the tickets to the clear plastic sleeve inside her wallet. Not because they were valuable, because someone had looked at her during the hardest weeks of her life and seen something other than failure. Across town, Thomas finished his shift shortly before midnight. His apartment was quiet. The only photograph displayed in the living room showed Grace standing beside a school playground, smiling with chalk dust on her sweater. He placed his lunch container in the sink before removing the small blue stamp from his work bag. Its wooden handle had become smooth after years of use. He turned it over thoughtfully. Used it again today, he said softly towards the photograph, as if Grace were still listening. I think you would have liked her. Then he placed the stamp back into the bag. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day. Another Route 22. Another 100 passengers. He had no way of knowing that the woman carrying those stamped tickets wasn't merely surviving because of his quiet kindness. She was slowly rebuilding the courage to believe that her dream had not disappeared with the money Ethan stole. It was simply waiting for her farther down the road. Summer arrived quietly in Cleveland, but for Brittany, Butler every day still felt like late winter. She had learned to survive. She had not yet learned how to hope. The calendar on her refrigerator became less about holidays and more about due dates. Red circles marked rent. Blue circles marked utility bills. Small black X's marked the evenings when Lily stayed with a neighbor because Brittany had accepted an extra cleaning shift. There were almost no empty squares left. One humid Wednesday afternoon, Brittany received a phone call just as she finished reconciling invoices at the plumbing company. Mrs. Butler. This is she. I'm calling from Lincoln Terrace Apartments. Her stomach tightened immediately. We've reviewed your payment history. She closed her eyes before the woman finished speaking. I'm afraid you'll need to pay the remaining balance by next Friday or we'll have to begin the eviction process. Brittany gripped the phone harder. I just need a little more time. I'm sorry. The decision has already been approved. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. It shattered the fragile sense of stability she had spent months rebuilding. That evening, she sat at the tiny kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the old refrigerator. She spread every bill across the table. Rent, electricity, medical insurance, school supplies, bus pass. There wasn't enough. Even after working 3 jobs, even after skipping nearly every personal expense, the numbers simply refused to cooperate. She reached for the calculator one more time. Maybe she had missed something. She hadn't. The result remained unchanged. Negative $183. Brittany leaned back and covered her face. For the first time since Ethan disappeared, she allowed herself to ask the question she had spent months avoiding. What if I can't do this? Not because she was weak, because exhaustion slowly convinces even the strongest people that effort no longer matters. The following morning, Lily found her mother still sitting at the kitchen table. Mom, Brittany quickly folded the papers together. Morning, sweetheart. Were you awake all night? I'm just thinking. Lily walked over carrying her favorite stuffed rabbit. My teacher says thinking too much makes your forehead wrinkle. That unexpected comment made Brittany laugh for the first time in days. "Your teacher sounds very wise." Lily climbed into her lap. "We're going to be okay." Brittany kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I hope so." "No," Lily gently corrected her. "I know so." Children sometimes lend faith to adults who have misplaced their own. Later that morning, they boarded Route 22. Thomas immediately noticed something was different. Brittany usually greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. Today she barely looked up. Her eyes were swollen. The bus rolled through familiar streets. Passengers came and went. Nobody noticed the woman quietly staring out the window while twisting a folded piece of paper in her hands. Thomas noticed. When the bus reached Lily's elementary school, Brittany stood to leave, too. As she stepped toward the front door, the eviction notice slipped from her coat pocket and landed near the driver's seat. She didn't realize it. Thomas picked it up. "Ma'am," she turned. "I think you dropped this." She accepted the paper quickly, hoping he hadn't read it. Their eyes met for only a second. He hadn't been trying to invade her privacy, but one word printed in bold letters had been impossible to miss. "Eviction." She forced a smile. "Thank you." After she and Lily stepped onto the sidewalk, Thomas watched them disappear through the school entrance. For the rest of the route, Grace's voice echoed in his memory. Years before her illness, she often came home carrying stories about students whose families were struggling. Whenever Thomas asked what he could possibly do, she always answered the same way. "You don't have to solve someone's whole life. Sometimes you only have to make sure they don't feel alone while they're living it." That sentence had stayed with him longer than almost anything else she had ever said. 3 days later, Brittany reached the bus stop later than usual. Her shoulders slumped beneath the weight of the brown canvas bag. Thomas could see she had been crying before she even boarded. She sat in her usual seat. Halfway through the route, the bus emptied until only 6 passengers remained. At the next red light, Thomas glanced into the overhead mirror. Without turning around completely, he spoke loud enough for Brittany to hear. "Long week." She hesitated. "It has been." He nodded. "They happen." Silence returned. Another block passed. Then Brittany surprised herself. "I think I'm running out of chances." Thomas kept both hands on the steering wheel. "You know," he paused, "my wife used to disagree with that." Brittany looked up. She believed life doesn't count chances. It counts steps. Brittany waited. "If you stop walking," Thomas continued, "that's when you're out. But if you take one more step tomorrow—" He smiled faintly. "Then apparently life has to deal with you one more day." A tiny laugh escaped Brittany, despite herself. "That sounds like something a teacher would say." Thomas smiled. She was. The traffic light turned green. Neither of them spoke for another minute. Finally, Brittany asked quietly, "Did she always believe that?" Thomas looked ahead at the road stretching into downtown. "No. She had to learn it. My wife survived breast cancer once." His voice softened. "The second time?" He stopped. "The second time she couldn't." "I'm sorry." "So am I. But before she passed, she told me something." He glanced briefly into the mirror. "As long as you're moving, life hasn't defeated you." Brittany stared at the familiar transfer ticket resting in her hand. Again the same blue words. Keep moving. Suddenly, they no longer felt like random encouragement. They belonged to someone who had suffered, someone who understood. When Brittany stepped off the bus that afternoon, she didn't put the ticket into her wallet immediately. Instead, she stood beneath the shelter for nearly a minute, reading the 2 words again and again. Keep moving. At home that evening, she opened the kitchen drawer where she had quietly begun storing the stamped tickets. There were now 9 of them. She lined them across the table. 9 ordinary pieces of paper. 9 mornings when someone had reminded her without lectures, without pity, without pretending her problems weren't real, that tomorrow still deserved a chance. She looked around the apartment. The eviction notice still sat on the counter. Nothing had magically changed. She was still behind on rent. She still owed creditors. She still worked 3 exhausting jobs. But something inside her had shifted. Not her circumstances. Her direction. She walked to the bookshelf and pulled out the old recipe notebook she hadn't opened in weeks. Flour stains still covered its corners. Handwritten measurements filled every page. She ran her fingers across the first recipe she had ever created. Then she whispered to the empty kitchen, "One more step." It wasn't a promise that everything would work out. It was simply a refusal to stop walking. And for the first time since Ethan had vanished with her savings that felt like enough to get through tomorrow. The following Saturday, Brittany Butler did something she had not allowed herself to do in months. She spent 2 hours on herself. Not at a salon, not shopping, not resting. She rode 2 buses across Cleveland to visit the East Side Community Skills Center, carrying her worn recipe notebook inside the familiar brown canvas bag. The building had once been an elementary school. The hallways still smelled faintly of floor wax and old books, but classrooms had been transformed into workshops where adults learned trades they hoped would change their lives. A faded banner hung above the entrance. "Second chances start here." Brittany stood outside for nearly 5 minutes. She almost turned around twice. The voice inside her head had become cruel over the past few months. "You're too old. You already failed. You can't afford to dream anymore." Then her fingers brushed the clear pocket inside her wallet. The oldest bus ticket rested there. "Keep moving." She took a slow breath and pushed open the door. The reception desk was staffed by a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair tied into a loose ponytail. Her name tag read Melissa Carter. "Good morning," Melissa said warmly. "Can I help you?" Brittany hesitated. "I heard there's a baking program." "There is. I don't know if I qualify." Melissa smiled. "Let's find out." Instead of sliding forms across the desk, immediately she invited Brittany into a small office overlooking the courtyard. There was nothing fancy inside. 2 chairs, a bookshelf, a coffee maker that looked older than both of them. Melissa poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "What made you come today?" It wasn't asked like an interview question. It sounded more like genuine curiosity. Brittany looked down at her hands. "I've wanted to own a bakery since I was 24. Melissa waited. No interruptions, no rushing. "My husband disappeared." Another pause. "He took everything." Still Melissa said nothing. Sometimes silence makes room for honesty. "I almost stopped believing it was possible." Brittany opened her recipe notebook. Every page contained handwritten notes, corrections, temperatures, tiny observations in the margins. Add 1 teaspoon less sugar. Rest dough 15 extra minutes. Customers smiled most at recipe 12. Melissa slowly turned the pages. "These are yours. Every recipe." "You created them." Brittany nodded. "I've been working on them for years." Melissa looked up. "You didn't stop baking?" "I couldn't." "Why?" Brittany smiled sadly. "Because when I'm baking," she searched for the right words, "it's the only time my life still makes sense." Melissa closed the notebook gently. "I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be." 2 weeks later, Brittany received acceptance into the evening baking certification program. Classes met every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 until 9:30. There was only one problem. She worked washing dishes until 10. Giving up the job meant losing nearly $400 every week. Keeping the job meant giving up the program. For 3 sleepless nights, she filled pages with calculations. There was no solution. Until the manager at Romano's unexpectedly called her into his office. Frank Romano was not known for lengthy conversations. He usually spoke in short sentences while balancing invoices. "I heard you're taking classes." Brittany blinked. "I was hoping to." He scratched his chin. "My niece went through that program." She waited. "I can move your shifts." She stared. You'll work Fridays and Saturdays longer instead." The schedule would still be exhausting, but possible. Brittany felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," Frank shrugged. "Just bring me cookies when you become famous." She laughed. "I don't plan on becoming famous." "Good. We already have enough celebrities." The first class felt overwhelming. Industrial mixers towered over her. Commercial ovens stretched along an entire wall. Professional stainless steel tables gleamed beneath bright lights. Most students were younger. Some had culinary school experience. Others already worked in bakeries. Brittany wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The instructor announced their first assignment: classic butter croissants. Simple. Except they weren't. The dough refused to cooperate. Her butter layers melted. The folds collapsed. The finished pastries emerged from the oven looking more like flattened dinner rolls than croissants. Several classmates produced beautiful golden pastries. Brittany quietly carried her tray to the trash. "Don't," Melissa's voice stopped her. She had been observing from the doorway. "They're ruined." Melissa picked one up anyway. She broke it open. Steam escaped. Then she tasted it. The layers failed. "I know. But the flavor," Melissa smiled, "is wonderful." She looked directly at Brittany. "Technique can be taught. Heart can't." Those words stayed with Brittany all week. At home, Lily insisted on helping every practice session. She stood on a small wooden stool beside the kitchen counter, wearing an oversized apron tied twice around her waist. "I'll measure. I'll crack eggs. I'll wash bowls." Sometimes she made more mess than progress. Sometimes flour ended up on the ceiling. One evening, an entire bowl of chocolate batter slipped from the counter and splashed across the kitchen floor. Silence filled the apartment. Lily looked terrified. "I'm sorry." Her lower lip trembled. "I ruined everything." Brittany stared at the disaster for a long moment. Weeks earlier, she might have cried. Instead, she began laughing. Real laughter. The kind that surprised even herself. Lily blinked. "You're not mad?" Brittany knelt beside her. "No." "But dinner? We'll make sandwiches. The batter. We'll make more. We don't have much chocolate. We'll use vanilla." Lily smiled cautiously. "What if that doesn't work?" Brittany reached into her wallet. She pulled out the oldest Route 22 ticket. "Keep moving." She handed it to Lily. "What does it say?" Lily read it aloud. "Keep moving." "What do you think it means?" The little girl studied the blue letters. "I think," she smiled, "it means clean the floor first." Brittany laughed again. "I think you're right." Together they wiped chocolate from cabinets, walls, and tiles. An hour later, they mixed another batch. This one turned out even better than the first. Late that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Brittany packed the successful cupcakes into small paper boxes for class the next day. She looked around the tiny apartment. Nothing had become easier. Bills still covered the refrigerator. The eviction deadline had only been postponed. Her days were still painfully long. But there was flour on the counter again, butter softening on the stove, fresh vanilla filling the air. For the first time in many months, the kitchen smelled the way it had before Ethan left. Not because the past had returned, because the future had quietly begun to knock. And somewhere across the city, Thomas Walker guided Route 22 through another ordinary evening, never imagining that the small blue words he had stamped onto a bus ticket were now taped to the inside cover of a recipe notebook that Brittany opened before every single baking lesson. Autumn painted Cleveland in shades of amber and crimson by the time Brittany Butler completed her baking certification. The certificate itself was printed on ordinary cream-colored paper. There was no ceremony, no applause, no television cameras. Melissa Carter simply shook her hand and said, "Now the real work begins." Brittany smiled. "I think it already has." She was right. Learning to bake professionally had been difficult. Convincing strangers to buy from an unknown baker would prove even harder. Melissa introduced her to the Saturday neighborhood market held every weekend in a small public square near University Circle. Local artists sold paintings, retired couples displayed handmade quilts, farmers offered fresh vegetables, one family made candles, another sold homemade jams. For $35 a weekend, Brittany rented the smallest booth available. $35 felt enormous. She counted the bills 3 separate times before handing them to the market coordinator. "You'll be booth 27, the woman said cheerfully. Brittany looked toward the far corner. It wasn't a prime location. In fact, it sat behind 2 large produce stands, where many shoppers might never even notice it. She didn't care. She finally had a place. The Friday before her first market, the apartment kitchen came alive again. Butter softened on the counter. Chocolate melted slowly over simmering water. Vanilla filled every room. Lily carefully attached handwritten price tags using blue ribbon. Chocolate chip cookies. Blueberry muffins. Cinnamon rolls. "What should we call the brownies?" Lily asked. Brittany thought for a moment. "Second chance brownies." Lily giggled. "That's funny." "It's also true." They baked until nearly 1 in the morning. When the final tray cooled, Brittany looked across the kitchen. 36 muffins, 24 cinnamon rolls, 48 cookies, 18 brownies. Almost everything they owned financially sat inside those cardboard boxes. If nobody bought them, there wouldn't be enough money to replace the ingredients next weekend. Saturday dawned clear and unusually warm. By 7:30, Brittany finished arranging her table. She covered it with a simple white cloth. No expensive decorations, no professional signs, only one small, handwritten board. Butler Home Baking, fresh. Every morning, Lily stood proudly beside her mother. "It looks beautiful." Brittany wished she believed it. Customers filled the market shortly after 8. People wandered past. They stopped at flower stands, bought pumpkins, sampled honey, admired handmade jewelry. Very few even glanced toward booth 27. An hour passed, then another. By 10:30, 1 muffin, 2 cookies. Total sales, $12. Brittany forced herself to keep smiling. Inside, disappointment settled heavily. Maybe the recipes weren't good enough. Maybe nobody wanted homemade baking anymore. Maybe dreams really did have expiration dates. Around 11, a familiar white and blue city bus stopped at the corner across from the market. Route 22. Thomas Walker climbed down during his scheduled break. He had seen the small market many times but rarely visited. Today something caught his attention. A familiar brown canvas bag rested beneath one of the tables. He walked closer. There was Brittany. She looked surprised. "Mr. Bus Driver." Thomas smiled. "I guess you've got another job?" "I'm trying." He examined the display. "It all looks excellent." "I hope someone agrees." He bought 2 cinnamon rolls, then 4 cookies, then another box of muffins. Brittany blinked. "That's a lot." "I've got friends." He actually didn't. At least not enough to eat everything. But she didn't need to know that. As he accepted the paper bag, he noticed her expression. Not excitement, relief. Sometimes the first customer matters more than the biggest customer. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "See you Monday." He walked toward a nearby park bench. Instead of eating everything himself, He waited. Within minutes, 2 sanitation workers sat nearby during their break. Thomas held up the paper bag. "Would you gentlemen like breakfast?" They looked surprised. "You sure?" "I bought too much." Soon, 3 college students walking through the park accepted muffins. A crossing guard received cookies. An elderly woman feeding pigeons smiled when Thomas handed her the last cinnamon roll. Every person asked the same question. "Where did you get these?" Thomas simply pointed across the street. "Booth 27. Word traveled faster than Brittany expected. By noon, 2 of the sanitation workers returned. "My partner wants 6 cookies." The elderly woman arrived carrying a friend. "You still have muffins." One college student posted a photograph online with the caption, "Best cinnamon roll at the market." More customers began stopping. Not crowds, just enough. Each sale led quietly to another. A young father bought brownies. A nurse purchased muffins before her evening shift. A grandmother sampled 1 cookie and returned for a dozen. By 3 o'clock, only 5 items remained on the table. Lily stared in disbelief. "Mom." "I know. We're almost sold out." At closing time, Brittany counted the money 3 separate times because she couldn't believe the total. After paying the booth fee, after replacing ingredients, after bus fare, she still held $143 in profit. It wasn't life-changing, but it was positive. The first business she had ever owned had earned money instead of losing it. As they packed the empty boxes into the brown canvas bag, Lily hugged her tightly. "We did it." Brittany smiled through tears. "We started. There'll be more Saturdays." "I hope so." "There will." Sunday afternoon. Brittany decided to deliver a thank you gift. She waited near the downtown bus terminal until Route 22 finished its shift. Thomas stepped off carrying his lunch bag. She approached shyly. "I wanted to thank you." "You already did." "No." She held out a small white bakery box tied with blue ribbon. "This is different." Thomas accepted it. "You didn't have to." "I know. But I wanted to." He opened the lid. Inside sat 4 warm cinnamon rolls, the same ones Grace would have loved. For a long moment he simply looked at them. Then he smiled. "My wife used to make something almost exactly like these." "I'm glad." "So am I." Neither of them mentioned the market. Neither mentioned the extra purchases. Neither mentioned that Thomas had quietly become Brittany's first real customer. Some kindnesses become smaller if explained. As Brittany prepared for the next Saturday market, she taped a fresh sheet of paper inside the cover of her recipe notebook. She wrote only 1 sentence. "First customer. Never forget." Then she placed the oldest stamped bus ticket beneath the page. "Keep moving." The words had carried her through heartbreak. Now they were beginning to carry her towards something she had almost stopped believing was possible. Not success, not yet. Simply momentum. And sometimes momentum is where miracles begin. By the following spring, Booth 27 had become one of the most familiar corners of the Saturday neighborhood market. People no longer searched for the handwritten sign. They searched for the aroma. Fresh cinnamon drifting through the cool morning air became the quiet announcement that Brittany Butler had arrived. Her routine was almost military in its precision. Bake through the night, catch the first morning bus, set up the booth before sunrise, smile at every customer, return home, sleep for 3 hours, then begin again. The profits were still modest, but they were steady. More importantly, the bakery dream was no longer just a notebook filled with recipes. It had customers. One Saturday near the end of April, a woman wearing a green apron stopped in front of Brittany's table. She looked to be in her late 40s with kind eyes that examined the pastries more carefully than most shoppers. "I've heard about your cinnamon rolls," she said. "I suppose I should see if the rumors are true." Brittany laughed. I hope they are. The woman bought one, then stood quietly beside the booth while taking the first bite. She closed her eyes for a second. Not dramatically, just long enough to remember something. My grandmother, she said softly. She baked like this. Brittany smiled. That's one of the nicest compliments I've ever received. The woman extended her hand. Olivia Bennett. Brittany Butler. I own Bennett Corner Cafe 3 blocks from here. Brittany's smile faded into surprise. I've been looking for someone who actually bakes from scratch. She glanced at the nearly empty display table. My customers keep asking why our pastries don't taste homemade anymore. Olivia looked directly at her. Would you be interested in supplying my cafe? For a moment, Brittany genuinely wondered if she had imagined the question. I'm sorry, Olivia smiled. I asked if you'd like to sell your pastries through my cafe. Words refused to come. I've never supplied a business. Everyone has a first customer. Brittany looked down at her hands. I don't own commercial equipment. I work out of my apartment. I don't know if I can produce enough. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. We'll start small. 20 cinnamon rolls. 30 muffins? Twice a week. If demand grows, she shrugged. We'll solve that problem later. Brittany accepted the offer before fear could interrupt. The following Tuesday, Bennett Corner Cafe displayed a small, handwritten sign beside the pastry case. Fresh today, handmade. By Butler. Home. Baking customers noticed immediately. One businessman bought 2 cinnamon rolls before work. A young mother ordered blueberry muffins for her children. A retired couple returned the next day asking if the woman who made those incredible brownies would be delivering more. By Friday afternoon, every pastry Brittany had supplied was gone. Olivia called that evening. I need double next week. Brittany nearly dropped the phone. Double? I'm serious. They're selling faster than my coffee. The extra income changed everything. Not overnight, but steadily. For the first time in over a year, Brittany paid every utility bill before the due date. Then she made an additional payment toward the debts Ethan had left behind. Each receipt went into a blue folder labeled Moving Forward. Lily noticed the difference, too. One evening, while unpacking groceries, she held up a carton of fresh strawberries. We haven't bought these in forever. Brittany smiled. I know. Are we rich now? Brittany laughed. Not even close. But we're getting stronger. Lily seemed perfectly satisfied with that answer. Meanwhile, Route 22 continued carrying familiar faces across Cleveland. Thomas noticed Brittany looked different. Not because of new clothes. She still wore the patched navy cardigan, still carried the same brown canvas bag, still counted every dollar carefully. But her shoulders had changed. They no longer bent beneath invisible weight. She walked like someone moving toward something instead of away from everything. One Thursday morning, she boarded carrying 2 white bakery boxes. She approached the driver's seat. These are for you? Thomas blinked. You've already thanked me. I know. But this isn't thank you. What is it? Product testing. He laughed. I've been promoted. You have. Inside the boxes sat cinnamon rolls and blueberry muffins. I need honest opinions. Thomas accepted them. I can do honest. During his lunch break, he shared them with 2 fellow drivers. One shook his head after the first bite. Where'd these come from? Thomas smiled proudly. Someone on my route. That evening, Brittany wrote 3 more customer suggestions inside her recipe notebook. Less glaze, slightly warmer cinnamon, perfect blueberry balance. Every opinion mattered. Every improvement mattered. Her business slowly became better because she listened. Then, just as life finally seemed to settle, the past walked back through the front door. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Brittany had just returned from delivering pastries to Olivia's cafe. Lily sat at the kitchen table finishing homework. Someone knocked, not loudly. 3 slow taps. Brittany opened the door without thinking. A man stood in the hallway. Older, thinner. His expensive confidence had vanished. The neatly trimmed beard she remembered had become uneven. Dark circles framed tired eyes. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "Hi, Brittany." Every sound inside the apartment disappeared. The refrigerator, traffic outside, the television from the neighboring apartment, everything. Only one name echoed inside her mind: Ethan. 7 years earlier, she would have run into his arms. Now she simply stared. "I've been trying to find you," she answered without emotion. "You already knew where I lived." "I didn't. I moved." He looked past her shoulder. "Lily? Is she here?" Brittany stepped into the doorway, blocking his view. "Why are you here?" He rubbed his hands together nervously. "I made mistakes." She said nothing. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness." Still nothing. "I just need a chance to explain." Finally, Brittany spoke. "You took everything." "I know." "You left your daughter?" "I know." "You left debts that nearly destroyed us." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then he said the sentence Brittany had expected from the moment she saw him. "I need help." Of course he did. People rarely returned after 7 years carrying apologies instead of needs. "What kind of help?" He hesitated. "I'm in trouble." "I owe people money." "I just need a loan." The words landed with astonishing calm. There had been a time when hearing them would have shattered her. Now they simply confirmed what she already understood. He hadn't come back because he had changed. He had come back because he needed someone else to pay the price again. Behind Brittany, Lily appeared quietly in the hallway. She looked at the unfamiliar man, then at her mother. "Mom." Brittany never turned around. "Go back to your room, sweetheart." "But, please." Lily obeyed. Brittany looked back at Ethan. The fear she once carried whenever she imagined seeing him again had disappeared. Only clarity remained. "You should leave." "I can explain." "I don't need an explanation. I need peace." "Brittany." She met his eyes without anger, without hatred, without tears. "I survived the day you left. I'll survive tonight too." Then she gently closed the apartment door. On the other side of it, Ethan remained standing alone in the hallway, realizing for the first time that the woman he had abandoned had become far stronger than the one he remembered. Ethan Butler did not disappear after Brittany closed the apartment door. For 3 days he waited, sometimes across the street, sometimes inside an old pickup truck parked a block away, sometimes near the Route 22 stop where Brittany and Lily caught the morning bus. He never approached Lily again. Perhaps even he understood there were lines he should no longer cross. But he continued leaving voice messages. "Brittany, please call. I just need 10 minutes. You don't understand what's happening." She deleted every message without listening to the end. On Friday morning, Thomas noticed Ethan before Brittany did. The unfamiliar man stood near the bus shelter pretending to study his phone. His eyes, however, followed Brittany constantly. Thomas had driven city buses long enough to recognize nervous behavior. When Brittany and Lily stepped aboard, Ethan took 1 step forward. "Brittany." Thomas closed the doors. The bus pulled away smoothly. Brittany remained silent until they reached the next intersection. Then she quietly walked to the front. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I think I brought trouble onto your bus." Thomas looked at her through the large rear-view mirror. "You didn't." "The trouble followed you." There was a difference. She nodded without speaking further. That afternoon, Ethan appeared outside Bennett Corner Cafe. Olivia Bennett happened to be arranging flowers near the entrance when she saw him pacing. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for Brittany." "Do you have an appointment?" He frowned. "I don't need an appointment." Olivia folded her arms. "Then I'm afraid you do today." Ethan eventually left before Brittany finished her delivery. When Olivia told her what had happened, Brittany's hands began to shake. "I'm sorry." Olivia gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You stop apologizing for someone else's behavior." That sentence lingered with Brittany all afternoon. By Monday, Ethan had become bolder. He waited outside the bookkeeping office where Brittany worked mornings. "I only need 5 minutes. I've already answered you." "I've changed." She looked directly into his eyes. "No. You've become desperate." "That's different." He flinched. "I owe dangerous people." "I'm scared." For a brief moment, Brittany saw the frightened man beneath the selfish one, but sympathy no longer erased memory. "So was I." She walked away. He followed. "Please," she stopped. "You remember the morning you emptied our savings?" "Yes." "I begged you to tell me what was wrong." "I know." "You looked at me," she swallowed, "and said everything would be okay." His eyes filled with shame. "Then you left Lily wondering why her father never came home." Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Brittany said quietly, "I carried your debts. I carried your silence. I carried our daughter. You carry your own consequences." She entered the office building without looking back. That evening, Melissa Carter called unexpectedly. "I heard you've had someone bothering you." Brittany sighed. News travels fast. Small communities usually care about each other. Melissa paused. "Have you spoken to an attorney?" "No. I can't afford one." Melissa smiled. "I know someone." 2 days later, Brittany sat inside a modest legal aid office downtown. The waiting room contained mismatched chairs and outdated magazines. Nothing looked impressive. Everything looked honest. Daniel Ross entered carrying a legal pad instead of a briefcase. He appeared to be in his early 40s with rolled-up sleeves and tired eyes that suggested long hours rather than indifference. "Mrs. Butler, please." "Call me Brittany." He smiled. "Then I'm Daniel." For nearly an hour he listened without interrupting. She described Ethan's disappearance, the stolen savings, the debts, the unexpected return, the repeated attempts to contact her. When she finished, Daniel closed his notebook. "First," he said calmly, "none of this is your fault. Second," he slid several papers across the desk, "there are legal options." Brittany stared. "I thought because we were married, marriage doesn't erase theft. It doesn't excuse abandonment. It doesn't give someone permission to harass you." Hope returned carefully. "What happens now? We document everything. Every call, every visit, every message. If necessary," Daniel looked at her reassuringly, "we ask the court to protect you." Brittany nodded slowly. For years she had believed strength meant enduring everything alone. Now she was beginning to understand that strength sometimes meant allowing good people to stand beside you. The process moved quickly. Daniel filed formal notices. He contacted creditors regarding debts created solely through Ethan's fraudulent actions. He requested financial records from the bank. Old account statements began arriving. Each page reconstructed pieces of a past Brittany had never fully understood. Casino withdrawals, hidden credit cards, cash advances, forged signatures. The truth proved even uglier than she had imagined. One Friday afternoon, Daniel called. "I've reviewed everything. And you have a strong case." "I do." "Very." He hesitated briefly. There may also be criminal consequences for Ethan. Brittany looked out the apartment window while holding the phone. Children played basketball in the parking lot. Lily laughed downstairs with neighbors. I don't want revenge, Daniel answered quietly. I know. You want peace? Yes. Justice and revenge aren't always the same thing. She considered those words carefully. The following week, Ethan appeared one final time. This time he stood outside the market where Brittany sold pastries every Saturday. Business was busy. Customers filled the square. Lily handed change to smiling families. Olivia chatted with regulars. Thomas had just arrived during his lunch break. Ethan stepped toward the booth. We need to talk. Before Brittany answered, Daniel Ross appeared beside her. He had stopped by the market after another client meeting. I'm her attorney. Ethan froze. You have no reason to contact my client directly. Daniel handed him an envelope. Future communication goes through my office. Ethan glanced between them. This is ridiculous. Daniel remained perfectly calm. No. What was ridiculous, he said quietly, was stealing your family's future. People nearby continued shopping, largely unaware of the conversation. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting, no threats, only consequences delivered respectfully. Ethan lowered his sights. For the first time since returning to Cleveland, he looked genuinely defeated. He accepted the envelope without another word. Then he walked away through the crowded market until he disappeared among strangers. Brittany watched him leave. She expected anger. She expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt surprisingly light. Not because Ethan had suffered, because she no longer carried responsibility for the choices he continued making. Thomas approached the booth carrying his usual paper bag. You okay? Brittany smiled. I think... She looked around at the customers enjoying pastries, at Lily laughing with Olivia, at Daniel speaking with a family nearby. I finally am. Thomas nodded. Grace had once told him that healing rarely arrived all at once. It arrived one honest decision at a time. As the afternoon ended, Brittany opened her recipe notebook before packing the remaining pastries. Inside the front cover, beside the faded Route 22 ticket, she wrote another sentence. Kindness gave me courage. Truth gave me freedom. She closed the notebook gently. For years she had been running from what Ethan had done. Now, with the help of people who had quietly stepped into her life, she was finally walking toward everything he had failed to take from her. The first anniversary of Butler Home Baking arrived without Brittany Butler noticing. She was too busy working. It was Olivia Bennett who remembered. You know, Olivia said one Tuesday morning while arranging fresh pastries inside the cafe display case, today makes exactly 1 year since your first delivery. Brittany blinked. Does it? It does. Olivia smiled. And you're already asking me for more oven space. They both laughed. Business had changed faster than either woman expected. Bennett Corner Cafe now sold out of Brittany's pastries almost every morning before 10. Weekend market customers often placed advance orders. Teachers ordered cookies for school events. Church groups requested muffins for fundraisers. Small offices began calling for breakfast trays. The apartment kitchen had become impossibly crowded. Every counter held mixing bowls. Cooling racks covered the dining table. Boxes of flour lined one hallway wall. Lily joked that they lived inside a bakery that happened to have beds. One Wednesday evening, Melissa Carter visited after work. She watched Brittany carefully maneuver around the cramped kitchen. You've officially outgrown this place. Brittany laughed while removing cinnamon rolls from the oven. I know. I just can't afford anything bigger. Melissa leaned against the doorway. What if you didn't have to buy a bakery? Brittany looked up. What do you mean? The community business center has shared commercial kitchens. I thought there was a waiting list. There is. Melissa smiled knowingly. But a space opened yesterday. The following afternoon, Brittany toured the facility. The building wasn't luxurious. The paint showed its age. Some equipment had clearly served thousands of bakers before her. Yet to Brittany, it felt magnificent. Industrial ovens, professional mixers, walk-in refrigeration, large preparation tables, everything she had dreamed of. The rental fee, however, made her heart sink. Even with increased sales, it would be difficult. She quietly thanked the manager and prepared to leave. Before she reached the parking lot, Olivia's car pulled in. "You forgot something." "I did." "Me." Brittany frowned. Olivia held out an envelope. Inside was a signed 1-year supply agreement. "I've been meaning to do this anyway." Brittany read the numbers twice. The guaranteed weekly orders were nearly triple their current arrangement. "I can't promise I'll sell every pastry," Olivia said honestly, "but I can promise I'll buy every pastry." Brittany stared at her. "Why?" "Because I already know your work. And because someone invested in my cafe 20 years ago when nobody else believed in me." She folded Brittany's hand around the contract. "It's my turn now." The guaranteed income made renting the commercial kitchen possible. Not easy, possible. Soon Brittany developed a new schedule. Bake in the commercial kitchen from 4 until 9 every morning. Deliver to Bennett Corner Cafe. Complete bookkeeping work remotely for existing clients. Prepare weekend market orders. Sleep whenever time allowed. The pace was exhausting. Yet every hour carried purpose. One afternoon, Lily visited the kitchen after school. She wore a tiny white baker's hat Melissa had bought as a joke. It quickly became her favorite possession. She stood beside the enormous mixer with wide eyes. "Mom, this machine is bigger than our refrigerator." "It almost is." Lily traced one finger across the polished steel counter. "When we have our own bakery." She stopped. "When?" "Not if." "When?" Brittany smiled. "I like the way you said that. I learned from you." A few weeks later, the business center announced a local entrepreneurship showcase. Participants could present their businesses to community leaders, lenders, and small business mentors. Melissa insisted Brittany apply. "I don't know anything about presentations." "You know your story." "That's enough." For several evenings, they practiced together. Melissa timed every speech. Olivia critiqued product displays. Lily acted as the audience, raising her hand to ask imaginary questions. Thomas unknowingly contributed too. Every Friday morning, he stopped at Bennett Corner Cafe before beginning his route. He always ordered the same breakfast: coffee, 1 cinnamon roll, 1 blueberry muffin, 1 receipt. He carefully saved every receipt inside his wallet. Not because he needed them, because he wanted Brittany to know she had regular customers. The showcase attracted nearly 100 local business owners. Some displayed clothing, others promoted landscaping companies, several demonstrated technology products. Brittany arrived carrying only pastries and her worn recipe notebook. When her turn came to speak, she stepped onto the small stage. Bright lights suddenly made the room feel enormous. Her prepared speech disappeared from memory. She looked down at the notebook. A faded blue bus ticket slipped partially from between its pages. "Keep moving." She smiled. Then she began speaking from her heart instead. "My name is Brittany Butler. I started this business with recipes written in a notebook, borrowed ovens, and more fear than confidence." Gentle laughter spread through the audience. "I believed success meant having enough money." She paused. "I was wrong. Success began the day someone believed in me before I believed in myself." She spoke about Melissa, about Olivia, about customers who returned every Saturday. She never mentioned Thomas by name. Some kindnesses still felt too personal to share publicly. When she finished, the audience applauded warmly. Afterward, several people approached with business cards. A local grocery manager requested samples. An event planner asked about weddings. A church coordinator wanted holiday dessert packages. The opportunities felt exciting. Then one conversation changed everything. A gray-haired man introduced himself as chairman of the neighborhood business association. "We have a vacant storefront." He handed Brittany a brochure. "It's small. It needs work. But it's in an excellent location." Brittany looked at the photograph. Large front windows, a brick exterior, corner entrance. She could almost imagine her sign hanging above the door. The monthly rent frightened her. Even discounted it. Represented the biggest financial commitment of her life. That evening, she walked past the empty storefront before going home. Dust covered the windows. Old paper signs still clung to the glass. Inside, sunlight stretched across worn wooden floors. She stood there for several minutes, not calculating costs, imagining possibilities. The next morning, she boarded Route 22, carrying the brochure. Thomas noticed immediately. "Big decision." She laughed softly. "Is it that obvious? You've looked at the same paper 3 times. She showed him the photograph. "What do you think?" Thomas studied the storefront. "It needs work." "It does." "But," she sighed. "What if I'm not ready?" Thomas smiled gently. "My wife used to tell her students something before every spelling competition." "What?" "You'll never feel completely ready for the next chapter." He looked toward the road. "Sometimes the page turns anyway." Brittany folded the brochure carefully. As she stepped off the bus that morning, she looked once more at the faded ticket tucked inside her notebook. Then she looked across the street toward the commercial kitchen, where her workday would begin. The bakery was still only a possibility, but possibilities had carried her farther than certainty ever had, and for the first time in years, opening the door to her own shop no longer felt like an impossible dream. It felt like the next page waiting to be written. Brittany Butler signed the lease on the small brick storefront on a rainy Thursday morning. The building looked tired, paint peeled from the window frames. The ceiling lights flickered. One corner of the wooden floor sloped noticeably toward the wall. To anyone else, it looked like another forgotten shop waiting for demolition. To Brittany, it looked like possibility. The landlord handed her a single brass key. "Needs a lot of work." "I know." "You sure about this?" She smiled. "I've waited a long time to answer yes." The first person she called wasn't Olivia. It wasn't Melissa. It wasn't Daniel. It was Thomas Walker. When Route 22 reached her stop that afternoon, she remained near the front after the other passengers had stepped off. Without saying a word, she handed him the key. Thomas looked confused. "I think you gave me something important." "I did." He examined the brass key. "What opens?" "My bakery." For several seconds, he simply stared at it. "You rented the place?" "I did." A slow smile spread across his face. "I knew you'd get there." She laughed. "No." "You believed I'd get here." "That's different." Construction began almost immediately. Friends volunteered weekends. Olivia organized a painting crew from cafe employees. Melissa convinced former students from the Skills Center to help build display shelves. Daniel arrived carrying a toolbox, despite openly admitting he wasn't good with repairs. "I can hand people screws." "That's about my skill level." Even Lily participated. She carefully cleaned every window until sunlight poured through the front of the shop. One afternoon, she stood in the middle of the empty room. "Mom, where will people sit?" Brittany pointed toward the front windows. "Little tables there." "What about flowers?" "Maybe." "What about books?" "I like that." "What about free cookies for kids?" Brittany smiled. "We'll have to discuss that with accounting." Lily laughed. "I'm accounting's daughter." The renovation took nearly 3 months. Every paycheck disappeared into flooring, plumbing, refrigerators, permits, and equipment. There were moments Brittany wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. One unexpected electrical repair nearly emptied her savings again. She sat alone inside the unfinished bakery that evening, with bills spread across a folding table. The numbers refused to cooperate. For the first time in years, fear quietly returned. Then someone knocked on the unfinished glass door. Thomas stood outside holding a small paper bag. "I figured builders forget dinner." She unlocked the door. "You didn't have to come." "I know. But I wanted to." Inside the bag sat 2 sandwiches, 1 apple, and 2 paper cups of coffee. They ate while sitting on overturned paint buckets. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Thomas looked around the empty room. "Grace always wanted a reading corner in our house." "Really?" "She believed people stayed longer where stories lived." Brittany smiled. "Lily wants books in here, too." Thomas nodded. "Sounds like they'd have gotten along." Before leaving, he reached into his wallet. He removed dozens of small paper receipts. Brittany recognized them immediately. "They're from Olivia's cafe." "I kept everyone." "You did?" "I wanted proof." "Proof of what?" He placed them gently on the folding table. "That people kept coming back." She looked at the stack. Every cinnamon roll, every muffin, every cookie. Each receipt represented one ordinary breakfast. Together, they represented years of quiet support. Brittany felt tears gathering. "You've been collecting these all this time," Thomas shrugged. "Bus drivers notice patterns." "I noticed yours." A week later, Brittany framed the receipts inside a simple wooden frame. She hung it inside her office, where customers would never see it. Some reminders were meant only for the heart. As opening day approached, another idea began forming. The memory returned unexpectedly one Saturday while watching a young boy count coins for a single cookie at the neighborhood market. His younger sister looked longingly at a brownie they couldn't afford. Without saying anything, Brittany slipped the brownie into their bag. Their grandmother tried to protest. "There wasn't enough money." "There is today." Driving home afterward, Brittany kept thinking about Grace's words. "As long as you're moving, life hasn't defeated you." That evening, she spoke with Lily. "What do you think about giving away bread?" Lily looked confused. "For free? Sometimes. But won't that cost money?" "Yes." Lily considered the question seriously. "Will we still have enough?" "I think so." "Then," she smiled, "someone probably needs it more than we need another dollar." Brittany hugged her tightly. The following Monday, she announced a new tradition to Olivia and Melissa. Every closing hour, any unsold fresh bread or pastries would be donated instead of thrown away. Olivia immediately agreed to help distribute food through a nearby shelter. Melissa connected Brittany with a community youth center. Word quietly spread. Within weeks, other small businesses joined. A florist donated leftover bouquets to nursing homes. A grocery store provided fresh fruit. A soup kitchen received enough desserts for every family on Friday evenings. No newspaper covered it. No television station noticed. Nobody asked for recognition. The kindness simply multiplied. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by, carrying several legal documents Brittany needed to sign. As he prepared to leave, he watched volunteers loading bread into delivery boxes. "I've got a question." "What is it?" "Why are you doing all this?" Brittany looked around the bakery. "I remember being hungry. I remember counting bus fare. I remember strangers helping me without asking for anything." She smiled gently. "I don't think kindness should stop with the person who receives it. It should keep moving." Daniel noticed the words immediately. "Keep moving." She nodded. It started with a bus ticket. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, Brittany walked slowly through the nearly completed bakery. Fresh paint reflected the warm ceiling lights. Tables stood in place. Shelves waited to be filled. The reading corner Lily wanted now held a small bookshelf beside two comfortable chairs. In her office hung the framed cafe receipts. Inside her recipe notebook rested the faded blue bus ticket. On the front window, the newly installed gold lettering caught the glow of the streetlights. Butler Bakery, handmade with hope. Brittany switched off the lights and locked the front door. Across the quiet street, she paused to admire the storefront one more time. Years earlier, she had believed success meant recovering everything Ethan had stolen. Standing there in the cool evening air, she finally understood the truth. The most valuable things in her life had never been stolen at all. They had been given freely. One bus ride, one encouraging teacher, one faithful customer, one honest lawyer, one loyal friend, one little girl who never stopped believing. And now it was her turn to make sure that same kindness continued its journey, one loaf of bread and one hopeful heart at a time. The retirement notice had been sitting inside Thomas Walker's locker for almost 6 months. He read it every morning before beginning Route 22. Not because he had forgotten the date, because he still wasn't certain he was ready to leave. 41 years. That was how long he had driven city buses through Cleveland. He had watched neighborhoods change, children become parents, empty lots become apartment buildings. He had memorized nearly every pothole along Route 22. He knew which passengers preferred silence, which elderly riders needed an extra few seconds before the doors closed, which schoolchildren always forgot something. Driving had never been only a job. It had become the rhythm of his life. One cool October morning, the dispatcher climbed aboard before Thomas began his route. Only 2 weeks left. Thomas smiled. So everyone keeps reminding me. We're planning something. I don't like surprises. The dispatcher laughed. That's unfortunate. Word of Thomas's retirement spread quickly among regular passengers. An elderly veteran who had ridden Route 22 every Tuesday for nearly 15 years shook his hand. You always waited when you saw me coming. Thomas shrugged. I knew your knee wasn't going to heal just because I hurried. A college student left a handwritten thank you note behind the driver's seat. You were kind to me every morning after my father died. You probably never knew. A nurse brought homemade soup. A mechanic fixed a loose cabinet door on Thomas's old house without charging him. One ordinary act of kindness after another quietly returned to the man who had spent decades giving them away. Thomas accepted every gift with embarrassment. You all are making too much fuss. No, the veteran answered. We're finally catching up. Meanwhile, Butler Bakery prepared for its official grand opening. The renovations were complete. Shelves stood full. The espresso machine hummed steadily. Warm lights glowed through the front windows every evening. Only one thing remained missing. The ribbon-cutting ceremony. Everyone assumed Brittany would schedule it immediately. Instead, she chose a date 2 weeks later. Exactly the same day Thomas would drive Route 22 for the final time. Olivia noticed first. That wasn't an accident. Brittany smiled. No. Melissa folded her arms. You planned this. I did. Neither woman asked another question. They trusted Brittany. During Thomas's final week, passengers seemed reluctant to leave the bus. People lingered after reaching their stops. Conversations lasted longer. Even the usually rushed downtown commuters slowed enough to thank him. One rainy afternoon, he spotted Lily waiting at the stop alone. She climbed aboard carrying a backpack almost too large for her shoulders. Where's your mom? At the bakery. Big day coming, Lily grinned. The biggest. Thomas smiled. I'm looking forward to seeing it. She tilted her head. You think you're just coming to eat cinnamon rolls? What else would I be doing? Lily covered her mouth. Nothing. Thomas laughed. I think you're hiding something. I promised. Fair enough. The final Friday arrived. Thomas woke before sunrise, as always. He ironed his blue transit uniform one last time, pinned on his name badge, polished his shoes, then stood quietly in front of Grace's photograph. Well, he smiled softly. We made it. He placed a small bouquet of white daisies beneath her picture before leaving for work. At the depot, dozens of co-workers waited with coffee and donuts. Someone had decorated his locker with photographs collected over 4 decades. There he was as a young driver with dark hair. There he was helping children during a snowstorm. There he stood beside an old Route 22 bus, long since retired. Thomas shook his head. I looked better then. No, one mechanic replied. You just looked younger. The final route began at exactly 6:10 a.m. Passengers applauded as he pulled away from the station. Thomas felt his ears turning red. This is embarrassing. No, someone called from the back. It's overdue. All day long, familiar faces boarded simply to ride one last time with him. Some didn't even need the bus. They rode several stops, thanked him, then climbed off. Late that afternoon, Brittany boarded alone. She carried only her brown canvas bag, no bakery boxes, no notebook visible. She sat quietly near the front until the bus reached the final stop. When every other passenger had departed, she walked forward. You ready? For retirement, I suppose. You'll miss this. I already do. She smiled. I'll see you tomorrow. At the bakery. Yes. He nodded. I wouldn't miss it. The next morning, sunshine poured across Cleveland. Neighbors gathered outside Butler Bakery, nearly an hour before opening. Fresh flowers decorated the entrance. Blue ribbons hung from the windows. Children pressed their noses against the glass. Inside, Olivia adjusted pastries. Melissa greeted guests. Daniel organized chairs. Lily checked the reading corner for the 5th time. Everything looked perfect. Except one chair near the front remained empty, reserved. Thomas arrived 10 minutes before the ceremony, wearing a simple gray suit instead of his transit uniform. He almost walked past the bakery. The crowd surprised him. So many people. A volunteer greeted him immediately. Mr. Walker. Yes. Would you come with me? I think there's been a mistake. There hasn't. She guided him towards the front entrance. Only then did he notice something unusual. Above the ribbon hung a second wooden sign beneath the bakery name. The Route 22, Reading Corner dedicated to those who help others keep moving. Thomas stopped walking. His eyes remained fixed on the words. Slowly he looked inside. The reading corner Lily had designed stood beside the front windows. Children already sat on colorful cushions holding books. On the wall above them hung a framed blue bus ticket. Keep moving. Thomas whispered almost to himself. Grace. Brittany stepped beside him. You once told me your wife believed stories helped people stay a little longer. He nodded silently. So this corner belongs to both of you. She handed him a small pair of silver scissors. I don't understand. I do. She smiled through tears. I can't imagine anyone else opening this bakery. The crowd grew completely quiet. Thomas looked around at Olivia, Melissa, Daniel, Lily, former passengers, neighbors, co-workers from the bus depot, people whose lives had quietly crossed his own over 41 years. For the first time in decades, the man who always knew exactly where Route 22 was going had no words at all. He simply held the ribbon gently in one hand, and understood that although his final bus route had ended the day before, another journey was only beginning. Thomas Walker stood quietly with the silver scissors in his hands. The blue ribbon fluttered gently in the autumn breeze. For a long moment he could not bring himself to cut it. Instead, he turned towards Brittany. "I think you should do this." She shook her head. "I opened the bakery. You opened the door. You taught me how to keep walking." Thomas smiled through moist eyes. "I only drove the bus." "No." Brittany glanced toward the framed blue ticket inside the reading corner. "You reminded people that they still had somewhere to go." The crowd waited in respectful silence. Finally, Thomas took a slow breath. "Then let's open it together." They each held one handle of the scissors. The ribbon fell. Applause erupted across the sidewalk. Children cheered. Neighbors clapped. Someone whistled loudly from the back. Lily rushed forward first, laughing, as she threw her arms around both adults at once. "Welcome to Butler Bakery." Customers filled the shop within minutes. The smell of fresh bread, cinnamon butter, and coffee wrapped around every conversation. Some visitors bought pastries. Others wandered directly to the reading corner. Several elderly passengers from Route 22 smiled when they noticed the framed bus ticket. One whispered to another, "That's his saying." "No," the other corrected gently. "It belongs to both of them now." Thomas spent most of the morning greeting people he had known for decades. Former passengers introduced grandchildren. Young professionals reminded him of bus rides during college. Parents recalled snowy mornings when he had waited an extra few seconds so their children would not miss school. Again and again, Thomas answered with the same quiet response. "I was only doing my job." Eventually, Olivia laughed. "If you say that one more time, I'm charging you for coffee." Thomas chuckled. Old habits. Near lunchtime, Brittany noticed an elderly woman standing alone in front of the reading corner. She wore a faded blue coat and held herself carefully with a wooden cane. Her eyes never left the framed ticket. Brittany approached. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled. "I don't think you remember me." "I'm afraid I don't." "My husband used to ride Route 22 to dialysis." She looked toward Thomas. "Every Tuesday. Every Thursday. For 3 years." Recognition slowly appeared in Brittany's eyes. "I remember seeing him once." "He passed away 5 years ago." "I'm so sorry." The woman gently touched the edge of the frame. "My husband always said your bus driver made him feel like he still mattered." Her voice trembled. "When people are sick, they begin to feel invisible." She smiled softly. "He never felt invisible on Route 22. Brittany looked across the bakery. Thomas was helping a little boy choose between 2 cookies. He had no idea someone was thanking him again. Some kindnesses continued working long after the person who offered them had forgotten. That afternoon, after the last guests had gone home, the volunteers helped clean the bakery. Melissa stacked chairs. Daniel organized leftover paperwork. Olivia counted inventory. Lily carefully placed returned books back onto the shelves in the reading corner. Thomas remained near the front window, watching leaves drift across the sidewalk. "It's beautiful in here." Brittany joined him. "It feels alive." He nodded. "So does Grace." Neither of them spoke again for several moments. Sometimes silence carried gratitude more honestly than words. Over the following months, Butler Bakery became exactly what Brittany had hoped. Parents stopped in after school. Retirees gathered each morning for coffee. Students studied beside the reading corner. The donation shelves near closing time were never empty. Neither were they ever wasted. People soon understood that anyone struggling financially could quietly take bread without explanation. No forms, no questions, no embarrassment. A small handwritten sign rested beside the baskets. If today is difficult, today's bread is already paid for. One snowy December evening, Brittany noticed something unusual. A young construction worker slipped several extra dollars into the donation jar before leaving. Minutes later, an exhausted single mother entered carrying a toddler. She hesitated while looking toward the bread shelf. Without saying anything, Lily quietly walked over. "My mom says that's already yours." The woman looked confused. "I don't have any money." "You don't need any today." The mother's eyes filled with tears. She accepted the warm loaf with both hands. After she left, Brittany hugged Lily. "How did you know what to say?" Lily shrugged. "I remembered what you told me." "Ooh, what did I tell you?" "When people need kindness," she smiled. "Don't make them ask twice." Christmas arrived with the bakery decorated in simple white lights. Thomas visited almost every morning, not because he needed coffee, because retirement had left quiet spaces in his days. Soon he began reading stories to children every Wednesday afternoon in the reading corner. At first only 3 children attended, then 6, then 12. Parents began arranging schedules around Mr. Thomas Storytime. He always ended each session exactly the same way. "Now remember," the children answered together before he could finish. "Keep moving." Laughter filled the bakery. One afternoon, Brittany watched from behind the counter. Olivia stood beside her. "You know something." "What?" "You've built more than a business." Brittany followed Olivia's gaze. A retired bus driver reading to children, teenagers studying together, neighbors sharing tables, volunteers packing bread, a little girl helping customers choose cookies. People from completely different lives gathered under one roof. "No," Brittany smiled. "We all built this." On New Year's Eve, after the final customers had left, Brittany locked the front door. The bakery stood quiet. Only the soft glow from the reading corner remained. She opened her recipe notebook one last time before closing the register. The faded Route 22 ticket still rested inside. Beside it, she had written many entries over the years. First customer, never forget. Kindness gave me courage. Truth gave me freedom. She turned to a blank page, then slowly added another sentence. Dreams become homes when enough people help carry them. She closed the notebook gently. Outside, snow began falling across Cleveland. Inside the warm bakery, surrounded by books, bread, and memories, Brittany realized that success had never been measured by the size of the building. It was measured by how many people felt a little less alone after walking through its doors. And that number continued growing every single day. 7 years passed more quickly than Brittany Butler ever imagined. The little girl who had once counted bus fare beside her mother was now preparing for college. Lily Butler stood in the Butler Bakery kitchen one quiet summer morning, wearing the same white baker's hat Melissa Carter had given her years earlier. It no longer looked oversized. She had grown into it. "You still keep this?" Brittany asked with a smile. Lily adjusted the hat proudly. "I'm never throwing it away." The bakery had changed with the years. What began as one small storefront had expanded into the neighboring space. The reading corner now occupied an entire sunlit room lined with hundreds of donated books. Every Wednesday afternoon remained reserved for story time with Mr. Thomas. Children who had once attended those readings now returned as teenagers to volunteer with younger readers. The tradition had quietly become part of the neighborhood. The donation shelf continued exactly as Brittany had promised herself. Some evenings it emptied completely. Other evenings people left anonymous envelopes containing cash with notes that simply read, "For tomorrow's bread." Nobody knew who started that custom. Nobody tried to find out. Kindness did not need signatures. Thomas Walker had settled comfortably into retirement. His hair had become almost completely white. His steps had slowed. But every Wednesday, without fail, he arrived before anyone else. He dusted books, straightened tiny chairs, prepared hot chocolate during winter. Lily often teased him. "You know you're volunteering harder than you ever worked." Thomas laughed. "Retirement is exhausting." One afternoon, after story time ended, Brittany found him watching children leave the bakery. "They're getting bigger." "They always do." Thomas smiled. So do dreams. He nodded toward Lily, who was helping a younger volunteer clean tables. Look at her. I still remember her counting coins for bus fare. So do I. Neither of them realized someone nearby had overheard the conversation. A young journalist named Emma Reed had stopped in only to buy coffee. Instead, she spent nearly an hour observing the bakery. Children reading, neighbors talking, bread quietly disappearing from the donation shelf, Thomas greeting every visitor by name. Before leaving, she approached Brittany. I'm a reporter for the Cleveland Community Journal. Brittany immediately looked uncomfortable. I'm not very interesting. Emma smiled. I think your customers would disagree. We're just a bakery. Emma glanced around the room. No. You're something else. A week later, the newspaper published a feature titled, The Bakery That Feeds More Than Hunger. The article never mentioned profits. It focused on people. Thomas, the reading corner, the anonymous bread donations, the volunteers, the community that had quietly formed around one woman's decision to keep moving. The story spread far beyond their neighborhood. Visitors began arriving from different parts of the city. Some came for pastries. Many came because they wanted to experience the kindness they had read about. Business increased again. Brittany accepted the growth carefully. She refused to expand faster than she could preserve the atmosphere that made the bakery special. We're protecting something, she often reminded her staff, not chasing something. One crisp October afternoon, Daniel Ross stopped by, carrying an old blue envelope. I found this while organizing archived files. He handed it to Brittany. Inside lay copies of the original legal paperwork from Ethan's case. The financial settlements had long been completed. The debts erased. The chapter officially closed years before. Brittany looked at the documents quietly. I almost forgot these existed. Daniel smiled. That's probably a good sign. She thought for a moment. Would you mind taking them back? You don't want them. I don't need reminders of what nearly destroyed me. She looked around the bakery. I already have reminders of what saved me. Daniel nodded and quietly slipped the papers back into the envelope. As he left, Brittany realized something important. Healing had happened so gradually she had almost missed it. The past no longer defined her future. It had simply become one chapter in a much longer story. That winter, the city announced its annual Community Legacy Award. Residents nominated individuals whose quiet service had changed lives over many years. Brittany ignored the announcement. So did Thomas. Neither knew that dozens of nominations had already been submitted. Former passengers, parents, teachers, children, customers, volunteers. Each wrote about the same man, the retired Route 22 driver who never hurried anyone. Weeks later, Thomas received an invitation to City Hall. He assumed it concerned transportation retirees. Instead, he found an auditorium filled with familiar faces. Brittany sat beside Lily. Olivia waved from the second row. Melissa smiled proudly. Even several former bus drivers had come. Thomas whispered to Brittany, "What is this?" She grinned. "You'll see." When his name was announced as the recipient of the Community Legacy Award, Thomas looked genuinely confused. There must be another Thomas Walker. There wasn't. The mayor spoke briefly. This award honors someone who reminded an entire city that ordinary kindness changes extraordinary numbers of lives. Thomas walked slowly to the stage. He accepted the plaque with both hands, then stood silently before the microphone. Everyone waited. Finally, he smiled. I drove a bus. Gentle laughter filled the room. I wasn't trying to change anyone's life. He looked towards Brittany. I simply believed people deserved patience. His eyes moved toward Lily. And hope. Then toward the audience. If I've learned anything, he paused. It's that kindness doesn't stop where you leave it. It keeps traveling, usually farther than you'll ever know. The audience rose together in a standing ovation. After the ceremony ended, Thomas and Brittany walked outside into the cool evening air. The city lights reflected across the sidewalks. Thomas held the award under one arm. "I don't deserve all this attention." Brittany smiled knowingly. "You said the same thing the day we opened the bakery." "Because it's true." "No." She gently shook her head. "You spent your whole life helping strangers reach where they needed to go. You just never imagined one of them would come back." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then quietly replied, "I'm glad you did." They stood together watching traffic move through downtown Cleveland. Among the passing buses, one Route 22 rolled by, exactly on schedule. Thomas instinctively looked toward the driver's seat. The younger driver lifted one hand in greeting. Thomas returned the wave. Some journeys ended. Others simply continued with different people behind the wheel. And somewhere deep inside, Grace's words still traveled with every mile. Keep moving. On a bright Saturday morning in early autumn, Butler Bakery celebrated its 7th anniversary. The line stretched halfway down the block before sunrise. Some people came for the cinnamon rolls. Others came for the bread. Many came simply because the bakery had become part of their lives. Inside, the familiar rhythm began before dawn. Fresh dough rose in warm bowls. Coffee filled the air with its rich aroma. Books waited neatly on the shelves in the reading corner. The donation baskets stood ready near the entrance. Nothing about the morning felt extraordinary, and perhaps that was exactly what made it extraordinary. Kindness had become routine. Brittany Butler stood behind the counter watching the first customers arrive. She still wore a simple apron instead of expensive clothes. She still greeted every guest by name whenever she could. Success had changed her circumstances. It had never changed her heart. Lily, now preparing to leave for college, tied on her apron beside her mother. "Ready," Brittany smiled. "As I'll ever be." The bell above the bakery door rang again. An elderly man entered slowly using a cane. Thomas Walker. The room immediately brightened. Children hurried toward him. "Mr. Thomas!" "Story time today," he laughed. "Only if everyone promises to help me remember the voices." "We promise." He settled into the reading corner as naturally as if he had always belonged there. In many ways, he had. Before beginning the story, Thomas reached inside the pocket of his old gray jacket. He removed something folded carefully inside a small plastic sleeve. The faded blue Route 22 ticket. "Keep moving." The children leaned closer. "Do you know why I keep this?" One little boy raised his hand. "Because it's lucky." Thomas smiled. "No?" A little girl guessed. "Because someone gave it to you." "Almost." He looked across the bakery toward Brittany. "It reminds me that one small act can travel farther than any bus." The children listened quietly. "They always tell us heroes wear capes." Thomas shook his head gently. "I've learned something different. Sometimes heroes drive buses. Sometimes they bake bread. Sometimes they teach. Sometimes they simply notice when another person is hurting." He carefully returned the ticket to its sleeve. "And every one of us gets the chance to be that kind of hero." Across the room, Brittany felt tears gathering again. Even after all these years, the simple piece of paper still carried the weight of an entire life changed. Later that afternoon, after the anniversary celebration had slowed, Brittany walked into her office. The framed cafe receipts still hung on the wall. Beside them rested photographs collected over the years. Opening day, the ribbon cutting, Thomas reading to children, Lily decorating cookies, Melissa smiling proudly in the kitchen, Olivia standing beside the first display case, Daniel attending every major milestone without ever asking for recognition. One photograph stopped Brittany. It showed nothing more than a city bus pulling away from a curb. Someone had taken it years earlier without her knowing. She smiled. Life could change because of moments most people never thought to photograph. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Thomas stood at the office door. "Busy." "Never too busy for you." He stepped inside carrying a small wooden box. "I've been thinking." "That can be dangerous," he laughed. "So I've been told." He placed the box on her desk. "I want you to have this." Inside lay his old Route 22 driver's badge, neatly polished. Beside it rested the faded ticket. Brittany looked up immediately. "I can't take this." "I don't need it anymore, but it's yours." Thomas shook his head. "It belonged to the road. Now it belongs to the journey it started." She carefully held the ticket between her fingers. "It changed my life." "I know." "It changed mine, too." She looked puzzled. Thomas smiled gently. "For years I believed I was simply driving people from one stop to another." He glanced through the office window toward the busy bakery. "You helped me understand I was doing something much more important. You showed me that kindness doesn't end when someone steps off the bus. It keeps traveling through the people they become." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Some gratitude could never be measured with enough words. That evening, after the final customers had gone home, Brittany closed the bakery exactly as she had hundreds of times before. She checked the ovens, locked the register, straightened the reading corner. Only one loaf of bread remained on the donation shelf. Just as she reached for it, the front door opened quietly. A young mother stepped inside, holding the hand of a tired little boy. "I'm sorry. We saw the lights." "I know you're closed." Brittany smiled. "How can I help?" The woman hesitated. "My son hasn't eaten since breakfast." "I get paid tomorrow." Before she could finish, Brittany placed the warm loaf into her hands, then added 2 cinnamon rolls, a carton of milk, and several apples. The woman tried to speak. Instead, tears answered first. "Thank you." Brittany gently shook her head. "When things get better," she smiled, "just help someone else." The woman nodded. "I will." After they left, Brittany stood alone inside the quiet bakery. Outside, the evening sky glowed with the last light of sunset. She opened her recipe notebook one final time. The first pages still held old recipes stained with butter and flour. Between them had rested the blue ticket for years. Now it was gone. In its place, she wrote the final entry. "The ticket was never the miracle. The person who handed it to me was. And one day someone will say the same about me." She closed the notebook slowly. The bakery lights reflected warmly across the windows. Children would return next Wednesday for stories. Fresh bread would be waiting tomorrow morning. Someone unknown would almost certainly need the donation shelf before the week ended. The work would continue, not because one woman had overcome hardship, but because kindness once received had refused to stop with her. That is how hope survives. Not through grand speeches, not through extraordinary wealth, but through ordinary people who choose compassion when no one is watching. One patient bus driver, one determined mother, one little girl who learned generosity before success, one teacher who believed, one cafe owner who took a chance, one lawyer who defended the forgotten, and countless strangers who decided to pass goodness forward instead of keeping it for themselves. Because every life is traveling somewhere. And sometimes the smallest gesture, a seat on a bus, a warm loaf of bread, a few encouraging words, or a simple ticket marked, "Keep moving," becomes the reason another person finds the strength to continue. That is the quiet power of kindness. It never truly belongs to the one who gives it. It keeps moving, Life rarely changes because of one extraordinary moment. More often, it changes because of countless ordinary acts of kindness that quietly build a bridge from despair to hope. We may never know how deeply, quietly a smile, a helping hand, a patient conversation, or a small sacrifice can transform another person's future. The greatest victories are not measured by wealth status or recognition, but by the lives we touch when no one is watching. Pain can become purpose. Failure can become wisdom. And the darkest chapters of our lives can become the very stories that inspire someone else to keep going. Never believe that your kindness is too small or your efforts go unnoticed. Every compassionate choice creates a ripple that travels far beyond what you can see. Just like a single seed can grow into a forest, one act of love can inspire another and another until hope reaches people you may never meet. So whatever burden you are carrying today, remember this: keep moving forward, keep believing, and keep choosing kindness. You may not be able to change the whole world, but you can change someone's world, and sometimes that is more than enough. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or a personal experience in the comments below. And if you enjoy inspiring stories about hope, resilience, and the power of kindness, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that kindness still matters.